Up next on Maine Challenge, our guest is Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap. And hello and welcome to Maine Challenge on Lincoln County Television, a production of Lincoln County Indivisible. Our guest today is Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap, a former longtime Maine legislator and several terms as Maine Secretary of State. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Chuck. It's great to be on the show.
It's really good to have you on our sprawling Maine Challenge campus. I hope your accommodations are acceptable. Well, you're in a hot seat these days for a whole lot of reasons, and hopefully we'll grab a few of those. Most people I talked to agreed with the decision to move the primary election from its date in June to the 14th of July, Tuesday, the 14th of July. I'll just keep repeating that if you'd like me to. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Maine people will vote securely and safely in the primary on July 14th this year.
Well, so far, I think it's safe to say the only really major change has been the date, and that's what we anticipate maintaining. We're going to make some final decisions here in the next week or two about what the disposition of the July primary is going to be. You go back to the middle of March, this happened very quickly, and we're still kind of trying to figure out how fast it did happen. You know, I was in Washington, D.C. in early February, and that was when the coronavirus was at the top of every news hour. You know, what was happening in China with the city of Wuhan locked down, and then you saw the pandemic begin to blossom in places like Iran and Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and then it made its way to the West Coast with cases appearing in Seattle. And we're kind of watching it, not terribly alarmed, but you know, here it was. And then you know, we were getting questions early on in the run up to the presidential primary on March 3rd. Well, what happens? What preparations would you make in the event of an outbreak? And at that point, we didn't have any cases in Maine at all. So, you know, we answered some very general questions and kind of left it at that. And then we got our first diagnosed cases. And very quickly, the governor responded and the legislature responded. They adjourned the session. The governor was given emergency powers, declared a state of civil emergency. My daughter just finished up her first year at the University of Maine, and she was in the pep band and was scheduled to go with the basketball team to a playoff game in Albany, New York. And they canceled it the day they were supposed to leave. And this is how fast this was going on. Then the students were told, you can stay in your dorms over break. You don't have to go home. Don't really want you traveling. And then that turned into get out of here. They closed everything. They shut down the campus. And we began talking about what's the impact going to be on the June primary at that point. So the discussion we were looking at was maybe doing everything with absentee ballots. You know, we have some tools at our disposal that are good tools. And we were talking with the governor about potentially going with an all absentee election and making some other changes as well. And then Julie Flynn called me. She said, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and it suddenly occurred to me, what happens if all the town offices are closed? Who's going to issue these absentee ballots and who's going to process them? And that's when we began to have the more focused discussion on moving the date. So the date was moved to July 14th. We have made no other significant changes other than removing some deadlines around absentee balloting. We didn't make people request them again if they already had, because there's that 90-day window. So if you requested one in February or March, you didn't have to request another one. So everything else seems to be running normally. The steps that we've taken seem to have flattened the curve. You know, it's still out there. It's, you know, we're still seeing new cases. Sadly, we're seeing people pass away from it, but not at the accelerated rate that you've seen in places like New York, in Boston, some other areas around the world where you see exponential growth. So with that working, I think our plan is to run a normal in-person election on July 14th. We're encouraging people to vote by absentee. It's a process we already have in place. And there's been a lot of confusion about the terminology of all mail versus absentee balloting. They're different animals. So we have a tried and true, very accountable system with a chain of custody in place for absentee balloting, and we're encouraging people to make use of that, especially if they have concerns about contracting the virus or spreading it.
And it seems to me that the some states are going to all ballot by mail, or at least they're talking about it. And it strikes me that Maine's system is already a well-oiled machine. And if we just think in terms of absentee ballots, what's the best way for a voter to get an absentee ballot? Is it through the state or is it through their town office?
It all goes to the town office. We have an absentee ballot request service online, but that request gets channeled to your town clerk. You can pick up the phone and call your town clerk. You can send a relative down to City Hall and have them fill out a form for you. So it's pretty easy to get an absentee ballot. There is an application process, and that's important. One of the things that has been kicked around by a lot of the advocates is, why don't we just simply send an absentee ballot to every registered voter? Well, that is a bit of an issue because people move and they don't update their voter registration addresses. I had a state representative after the last election cycle contact me and say, I think there's a problem with the central voter registration system. And they had used their copy of the voter file legally to send out a mailing to all their constituents. It was in a somewhat urban area. And about 700 of these letters came back. This is in March, like 3.5 months after the election. So I said, bring them to me. So I bring this grocery bag full of return mail, and we take stacks of them and we put them in front of the computer and we run through the CVR. 100% accurate. Every address was what we had in the CVR. So what we learned is that people in that area tend to move a lot. They live in an apartment for 2 or 3 months and then they move somewhere else. It's a rather stressed population base, really. And with that example behind us, the idea, and this is where, the currency of the president's claim that vote by mail is open to fraud is rooted in. It's not, but if you send live ballots just out into the ether without any understanding of who's getting them and who's returning them, you lose control of the chain of custody. And that puts you at risk, really, at least in perception, if not in reality.
Do you anticipate that there will be polls open and voting taking place in every town?
Oh yes, we do. And in fact, even if we had decided to go to something like an all absentee election, that was going to be the case, simply because you have people with disabilities, whatever that means. I mean, it may mean a mobility issue, it may mean a visual issue, people with dexterity problems, they can't hold a pen to mark a ballot. We have technology in every polling place, the accessible voting system. And, and plus we have election day registration. So even if we went to all absentee, you'd have to have some place where people could update their voter registration or register new, and people with disabilities have access to that system. So it would be all absentee with a caveat, but at this juncture, we anticipate having polling stations open. I know that we've been getting a lot of questions from towns about that, about the availability of poll workers. We've been working with some of the advocates on a recruitment effort to get younger poll workers involved, because poll workers tend to be from the demographic of the retired elements. So, and that's been demonstrated to be a portion of the population that is at risk. Yes. So we're working with folks to try to get them some extra resources. We have the federal allocation of money that we can use to help with that sort of thing. We're getting personal protective equipment for poll workers, which we hope to have in every town at least a week before the election, along with some plexiglass barriers to help enhance that. And on top of it, we are encouraging people to vote by absentee ballot.
Great. I have two more voting questions and then we'll move on. One is ranked choice, how's ranked choice voting going to work in the primary and in the general election this year? I understand from Sarah Gideon, actually, who was on the show with us, that ranked choice voting will apply in the senatorial primary and will also apply in the general. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. So ranked choice voting has a little bit of a complicated history, as you know.
Yeah.
It was enacted by an initiative back in 2014 and or 2016, I think it was. I don't remember. It's been so many years and lawsuits. I haven't been able to keep track of the time. But when it was enacted by the voters, it ran immediately into a number of problems about the constitutional provision that elections and state elections are determined by plurality. Now, what's not described in the Constitution along that line are either primaries or federal elections. So there was a solemn occasion that was called by the Supreme Court. They ruled that if ranked choice voting was challenged on the issue of plurality, it would probably be struck. So the legislature, through a series of actions, and then the people's veto to undo what the legislature did, so they revisited everything they did again. We are using ranked choice voting for all state and federal races, not county races, but state and federal races in the primary. And we are going to use it for all federal races in November, providing that the people's veto that's currently being circulated now to not use ranked choice voting for the presidential race, assuming that's not successful. If they successfully gather a minimum of 63,067 signatures, that would put a stay on the effectiveness of the law until such time as we could certify the effort. And if we certify the effort within 30 days, then the stay would remain in effect and we would not use ranked choice voting for the presidential race in November, but we'd have a straight up and down vote about use of ranked choice for the presidential election, for the general election. So it's a little complicated, but yes, we are going to use ranked choice voting for the congressional race and the Senate race for sure in November, but we will not use it for legislative races in November.
Thank you. That's an interesting challenge for people who like to stay up on this stuff. Final question, and this is this could be, you could make this a yes or no if you wanted to. Do you have any concern about Maine voting machines getting hacked?
No, I have no concerns categorically, and this is why. There's nothing to hack. What the machines, they're not actually voting machines, they're tabulators. The unwobbling pivot upon which the entire system turns is that paper ballot that a voter receives and marks with a felt pen. No matter what happens, you always have that ballot to lean back on. And when we were looking at different technologies now 15 years ago around accessible voting and other systems after the passage of the Help America Vote Act and the funding of it, there's a $20 billion funding mechanism. And there's a lot of interest in going towards more rapid technology that would tabulate things more swiftly, along with things like instant runoff voting, which is an electronic version of ranked choice. We looked at the technology and we thought, if you have a question about the outcome of the election, you want to be able to do a recount. So we should stick with paper ballots. And every time I think about that, I feel like I should go to a church and light a candle and Thanksgiving for making that decision, because it really has paid off for us in terms of maintaining the accountability and integrity and legitimacy of our elections process. The tabulators they're programmed by precinct. They're tested by precinct. They have no connectivity to the internet whatsoever. In fact, the programming is sent on a memory stick that's sent through the mail. It's not downloaded. And again, if there's a question about that, you got the original ballots. So when we do ranked choice, we are actually taking scans of the ballots from the tabulators. They don't read the bubbles. They scan the entire ballot. And when we run the ranked choice algorithm, it's really just a simple sorting Excel spreadsheet is all it is. We've had a couple mathematicians replicate what we've done and come up with the exact same results, which is what you want. And when we do the rankings, we just simply scan all the hand count ballots through a high-speed tabulator and take all those images, run them through the system, and that gives you your rankings. But that's all based on the paper ballots. The only connectivity that those tabulators have to the outside world is the 120-volt AC plug that goes into the wall, and that's it. There's no ability for Russian military intelligence to get into them.
Well, there's another reason, as if I needed another reason. There's another reason that I'm glad I live in Maine. Thank you for that answer, although it was more than a yes or no. I hear today that there's a new announcement, and I didn't study it carefully, but there's a new announcement concerning car registrations. I know that the Secretary of State's office doesn't just handle voting issues. There are a few car registrations and licensing issues. And is there something new about car registrations that we should know?
Yes, we have been working with the governor's office very closely on these issues. And of course, with the emergence of the civil emergency, we had a couple of scares on our own office about potential infections. We sent everybody home. We closed down the offices. The city of Portland actually asked us to close our Portland branch before we actually closed it, because they were locking everything down in Portland. So with the closure of the offices, that deprives citizens of those services. And you also had a lot of town offices closed as well. So we came up with a couple of different mechanisms whereby people, first of all, if your registration or your license is expiring during this time, it's automatically extended for 30 days beyond the extent of the civil emergency. And also, you have those situations where people get involved in private sales. They buy a car from a neighbor. They don't have access to pay excise taxes. They don't have access to get plates or stickers. We actually provided a letter for folks that they could keep in their glove compartment if a law enforcement officer pulled them over because they didn't have any plates on their vehicle, to show that this is, strange time. So that the executive order has actually been amended because now towns are starting to reopen and we're giving people some different deadlines to get that work done. We did a press release about it, I think today, and we're working with the governor's office and the towns. Because the towns, they obviously have an interest in helping people comply with the law. Everybody's revenues are down, so excise taxes are greatly welcomed in these communities. So we're working with the towns on getting those things expedited for them and hopefully begin to come out of the shutdown period.
Well, thanks for all that you're doing in that regard. I know you have a pretty complicated job. And one thing that if I was at the corner bar launching one with you, I would definitely be asking you, so I'll ask you now, about the voter commission, the federal voter commission that you served on with Secretary Kobach under the direction of Mr. Trump. And I understand you played kind of a key role in that, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you were in the legislature, Chuck, and I was too. You and I have served you probably can't even remember how many task forces and commissions you served on. I've served on a lot too. But this was the weirdest experience of my professional career, and I won't go through the whole Shaggy Dog story, but, it got to the point where it was clear that we had conflict on the commission. I had protested some of the statements of some of the other commissioners saying that, open voter fraud everywhere without any evidence of proof. And I got walled off. I wasn't getting any answers. And because I was the only one that was actually willing to talk to the press called me a lot. And, in September, October of 2017, I wasn't getting any information from the White House. And a reporter said to me, it's like, well, this has happened before and there was a lawsuit and the person prevailed. You ought to think about that. And it's like, I'm not really interested in suing anybody. But then a couple of things happened. I'm trying to keep this short because I know we're coming up near the end, but I got a press report sent to me by a reporter asking for comment. Our lead researcher on the commission the week before had been arrested in Maryland on charges of possession of child pornography, which is a pretty serious offense. We never had heard anything about it. And then I got another email from the Minnesota Secretary of State about a voter fraud advocacy group that was touting how they've been invited to speak to the commission in their December meeting, which was my first indication of a December meeting. So I wrote a fairly strongly worded letter to the commission saying, look, I'm on the commission. I deserve to know who we're talking to, who, what we're working with for information, and what our schedule is, right? And I got a response about a week and a half later saying that they were reviewing my request with counsel. And that's when it got really strange, because then I got an anonymous Facebook message from a friend of mine in DC who said, you need to call me. And I call them up and they say, do you have a lawyer? And I said, do I have a lawyer? Like, yeah, you need lawyers. You can't take on the Trump administration and the Department of Justice by yourself. So I got hooked up with American Oversight in Washington and Patterson Belknap in New York, and they talked me into filing the litigation, which it was really, the strange thing about that, Chuck, was that when I was named to the commission, I got literally thousands of postcards, letters, emails, people urging me to get off the commission. Don't legitimize it with my good reputation. I have a decent reputation. Then that changed when I sued the commission. I got thousands of letters, postcards, and emails urging me to stay on the commission. And when the Washington, D.C. District Court ruled in our favor on December 22nd, within about 10 or 15 days, the president issued a new executive order and dissolved the commission. The documents we got showed that they had already started writing a report, even though we'd only had 2 meetings and it really gathered no evidence. So it was a bit of it was a real disappointment, actually, because I thought we had an opportunity to answer some serious questions that had been asked about voter misconduct and systemic issues around the country, and that was not allowed to happen.
It was easier to have high hopes about the administration back in those days than it is now.
Unfortunately, it was, yeah.
Do I understand correctly that you have reached your term limit? That I had forgotten that constitutional officers have term limits.
Well, it's easy to forget with me. I mean, I've been in, this is my 7th term, and I was served, we have 4 terms that we can serve. I was running for my 4th term, and because I'm one of 3 secretaries of state that are elected by the state legislature. New Hampshire and Tennessee are the other 2, by the way. And in 2010, I was running for my 4th term, and because the Republicans did very well that year, and they liked me well enough, but they really wanted one of their own, and they politely but firmly showed me the door. And I went out into the world for a while, and after 2 years, it looked like we were going to take the majority back, and I was approached by a number of legislators who said, geez, we'd love to have you back if you're willing. And it took me about 4 months to make that decision, and I'm glad I did. And so now I'm in my 4th consecutive term. So in January, Maine will be swearing in a new Secretary of State. And it's in these times, it's something I'm actually kind of looking forward to.
Are you able to give us any clues about what's next?
I'm not, because I have no idea. We've been so focused on managing things through the pandemic that I haven't had an opportunity to have any conversations about new things. And realistically, I think it's going to be very difficult because it's a very tough world right now, and people aren't hiring middle-aged former politicians. But the good news is, I've been very careful. I've been able to pay all my bills, and the only thing I am concerned about, my daughter's in college, and I want to help her as much as I can. So I'm too young to retire, and I still have some things I want to do. I really want to help people. I love helping people. What I've always loved about this job, and I know you can share that. The great thing about public service is that you can help people. Yeah. And so I want to continue to do that somehow, support a good organization, and we'll see where it carries me. I really don't worry about it.
Well, I hope you take a little time off so that you don't have the phone ringing every 2 seconds, and get a little time off between this and your next adventure. But I will say that I really appreciate your service as Secretary of State. You've done really well. I've really enjoyed working with you when I was in the legislature. And I think you've done a great job, and you will be missed, but it's also exciting that you're on to whatever the next adventure is.
Well, today actually was the last day of my canceled vacation, so I am looking forward to taking some time off.
Do you think term limits are a good thing for constitutional officers?
Term limits are a mixed bag. They do provide opportunity to people that would, I'm a beneficiary of term limits. Dan Gwiadoski was termed out in 2004. That's what opened the door for me to be elected Secretary of State. It works the way it was designed, but I don't think the designers had the intention that has borne itself out, which is to really carve away the power of legislative leadership.
Right.
And you see things drifting here and there. I think probably the most common phrase, and this is not an indictment of any presiding officer that I've served with, but the most common phrase you hear from the rostrum often is the chair is in error. It's very difficult to learn everything you need to learn to be a legislative leader in that short amount of time. In the old days, you served 10 years before you were even a committee chair, let alone run for leader. I was a committee chair my second term. Sarah Gideon, who's been a very strong speaker, was speaker her third term. That was unthinkable just 20 years ago. So it has good things about it, but it has a lot more institutionally bad things, I fear.
What's the greatest challenge, in just a few words, because we're just about done, but what's the greatest challenge that you have faced as Secretary of State?
The worst thing I have to deal with are families of young people who are killed in stupid crashes. And the one thing they want is the one thing I can't give them, and that's their loved one back.
Understand. Well, we've just about run out of time. I didn't think it was going to be full of gaps and no information. I knew it was going to be a lively half an hour, but thank you so much for taking part in Maine Challenge. Our guest has been Secretary of State Matthew Dunlap of Old Town. Is that right?
Old Town, that's correct.
Old Town. And we thank you very much for participating. And I will also say to our viewers that the Secretary of State's office is always available and accessible. And I have always had a very good experience dealing with that office. And a lot of that credit goes to the Secretary of State, Matt Dunlap. So thank you, Matt. And thank you all for watching Maine Challenge on Lincoln County Television, a presentation of Lincoln County Indivisible. See you next week.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.